All right, so thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. My name is Andrea Smith. This meeting is being recorded. It is the Vaping Unveiled presentation on November 18th at 6:35 p.m. And I wanted to take a moment just to introduce myself and give my colleague Darren an opportunity to introduce herself. Then we will introduce our guest presenter, go through the presentation, and then we have some time if folks have questions for us as well. So my name is Andrea Smith. I am the Substance Misuse Prevention Coordinator for the Upper Valley region, and I'm a co-facilitator of our Regional Substance Misuse and Suicide Prevention Coalition altogether. And so all together in conjunction with Darren Smith, and I'll let Darren introduce her who she's representing.
My name is Darren Smith. I am the Substance Misuse Prevention Coordinator for the Greater Sullivan County, and I co-facilitate the, I almost said all together, that's yours, the Youth Can and the Compass Coalitions, and I also focus on substance misuse and suicide prevention. And I'm really excited to be here tonight. I used to hear about Breathe New Hampshire a lot when I was an undergrad, so I'm really excited to learn more.
Great, thank you, Darren. So again, Darren and I are colleagues. We both work for Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center, and again, representing the Upper Valley and Greater Sullivan County region for the substance misuse prevention. So, excuse me, I'll introduce our guest presenter tonight. So we have with us Kim Coronis. She is the Policy and Program Manager for Breathe New Hampshire. Throughout the presentation, Kim will talk a bit more about Breathe New Hampshire and some of the work that they do. So we'll give her time throughout to talk a bit about that. And then when the presentation's over with, feel free to ask Kim more questions. I know in our registration, I asked folks if they would be interested in holding a specific presentation like this for their organization, their school, their community. So please take that opportunity to talk, ask questions about what maybe that presentation could look like. And we certainly can take that offline if needed as well. So unless anybody has anything major, you can throw anything in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. Otherwise, Kim, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea, and I appreciate everybody jumping on tonight. Basically, I'm going to go through, this is a PowerPoint presentation. This is specifically our Vaping Unveiled for adults. So this content is not exactly the same as what we would share with middle school or high school students. We do have different content for those age groups. Similar to this, we do, when possible, we visit schools and youth organizations in person, or we can do it virtually. So that opportunity is there. I'm going to try to go through the slides. I know we have just a small group. I'll go through them all, I guess, just first, and then we'll take questions at the end, and then we can discuss things. It's just easier to keep the flow going. So I'll get going on this, and then hopefully we can talk for a few minutes afterwards. So thank you all again. So Breathe New Hampshire is a nonprofit. As Darren said, we are located in Manchester. We are a state-wide nonprofit. We've been around for over 100 years. Our focus is on respiratory issues and lung health. So these are some of the things that we work on and provide services and content for. In particular, asthma and COPD, some clean air initiatives. As a policy manager and program manager, sometimes I do work on legislative issues, whether it be local, meaning the State House, and at times we have been involved with some federal legislation as well. So just keep in mind that all these things are available. We have periodically something called COPD Connect. Those sessions are both virtual or in person. There is one on the 29th of this month. There's more information about it on our website. This will have a guest speaker at the end of the month, and the respiratory therapist is going to focus on different nutrition ideas for people who have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and for the caregivers as well. We did receive some support for this project, meaning Vaping Unveiled. Overall, this is some of the items or the key things we're going to hit, a little bit about what vaping actually is, the history, some of the trends, different effects or health impacts that vaping can have on people of all ages, some of the products that are out there, policies in place here in New Hampshire, some of the treatment resources or resources to quit vaping. And then again, we can take questions at the end. So what is vaping? Overall, it's the inhaling and exhaling of an aerosol, and the aerosol is produced by a variety of devices that are out there on the market. And one thing that all of the products have in common, they do have a power source, and it's usually a battery nowadays. You'll see an example of one of the older types of devices, but nowadays it's all pretty much lithium batteries. In the process of vaping, you're taking a different combination of nicotine, in most cases, is in all of the solutions, flavorings and other chemicals, heating them up in the device, and then the user is inhaling that aerosol or vapor. So these are some of the common things that are found in the devices. We talked about the battery source, that coil looking spring thing, the atomizer, that's what the liquids and chemicals travel over prior to the user inhaling the liquid. That is what heats up these liquids, and that is where possibly based on the temperature of how the liquid is heated, you might even change the chemical combinations or chemical compounds of these liquids. E-liquids in some cases are purchased in bottles for the refillable devices. Other times they come in the cartridges that are already pre-filled with the flavor and the liquid, and the atomizer is built right into the cartridge. Again, no matter the size or the shape or the style of the device, they all create an aerosol. It's not a water vapor. You can't have a number of chemicals that you're heating up and expect the result to be just a water vapor. Keeping in mind whether it's adults using the products or young people, in particular for young people, the use of e-cigarettes is unsafe for kids, teens, and young adults. And we'll explain a little bit more detail why. And also for pregnant women, it's not safe, similar to cigarettes, nicotine and tobacco, and also all the other chemicals in tobacco products. So what's become unique with these products over time is how they look. And that's how over time the attraction from some young people has occurred and the interest in this product from young people. So back in 2007, the first e-cigarette was imported into the US. It's the image on the left. It looked like a cigarette. It was kind of clunky. You had a charger, like a phone charger. You plugged it in, charged it, and used it. The device itself was pretty heavy, even though it's shaped like a cigarette in that size. And there were only nicotine cartridges, no flavors involved at all. So that's how the product was for a few years. The center image is the tank or mod systems. These were bigger systems. And again, referring to the tank, these are refillable devices. That's when flavors started to be introduced. The person who bought the device could actually change the mouthpiece or change the size of the battery, purchase different e-cigarette solutions. So that became very dynamic. It also started to attract other people who are not smokers trying to quit smoking, which was the premise behind the device originally. Then moving forward, the last couple of years, the big explosion on the market has been these smaller devices that are called disposables. They're pre-filled with flavored liquids. The battery's already in it. The way it starts is upon drawing on the mouthpiece, that's what activates the battery. Unfortunately, in this case, with disposables, they're being thrown on the ground too. They're not always properly disposed of. So you have remaining liquid solutions in there, you have a lithium battery, and you have the plastic cartridge ending up in the environment. Again, just looking at the prior pictures, this is kind of how things have progressed over time with the different, what they call evolution of e-cigarettes and the vaping products. It's funny how they sometimes circle back. You know, at first it went from small to big, and then it goes back to small and to disposables. So it's interesting how that has occurred. One thing you will notice, there's really not any popular product on the market right now that looks like a cigarette, which is how it first started. Historically, this is how it began. A pharmacist in China was actually trying to develop a tool to help his father quit smoking. So that was that first e-cigarette. He was going to gradually reduce the amount of nicotine in the cartridges that his father used in the hope of getting his father totally off a nicotine product. A few years later, e-cigarettes were introduced to the US market, again, being promoted as a smoking cessation tool, as a way for adults to quit smoking. In 2008, the World Health Organization ruled that electronic nicotine delivery systems, or ENDS, were not a legitimate smoking cessation aid. That is still the underlying policy and how they're regulated in this country. They are not at this time approved for smoking cessation aids. Back in 2010, we actually became one of the first states to pass regulation or policy to prohibit the sales to minors. And back then the age was 18. A few years later, we're looking at FDA, which Food and Drug Administration rules and regulations. At the time in 2016, all of these products now became regulated as tobacco products. So the same policies were supposed to apply to these products as tobacco. I say we're supposed to apply because there are some gray areas when it comes to regulation of e-cigarettes. One of the big companies that was focused on over time by the Food and Drug Administration and congressional policymakers was Juul. In 2016, they came out with their product and it was very innovative. It looked like a flash drive, very slender, very small. It had pre-filled what they called pods with different flavors. It was kind of a really nifty design, very compact, very sleek. Unfortunately, it also appealed to a lot of younger people under the legal age to purchase products. There's been a lot of other regulations since then over time. Again, the policies are supposed to help prevent the use of these things by youth, so people under the age of 21. Unfortunately, it's very hard to enforce because the products are sold everywhere. They're not just in vape shops. They're not just available online. They're in a lot of convenience stores. They're easily purchased. One of the more recent things was just last month. The FDA actually authorized the marketing of 3 products by R.J. Reynolds, which is a tobacco company, only tobacco flavored products, only to try and benefit adult smokers who are trying to quit. And then they want people who are trying to quit to also reduce their cigarette consumption. They don't want people to use both products at the same time, which is referred to as dual use, because in effect, you could actually intake even more nicotine than if you stuck with one product on its own. So the FDA also emphasized when they made this announcement that it does not mean the products are safe or approved by the FDA. They're just considering it as a potential way for adults to quit smoking. It's not an approved way per se, but they're looking at it and testing it out right now. And one thing we need to keep in mind, all tobacco products, the ones that contain nicotine, are harmful and addictive. And if you aren't currently using a tobacco product, you should not start vaping or using any of the dissolvables or disposable tobacco products. So we mentioned the aerosol that's produced earlier, and similar to secondhand smoke, there is a concern with secondhand aerosol. In other words, you're in the vicinity of someone vaping or smoking. You're exposed to secondhand smoke or aerosol. The difference with the aerosol is if you look at the e-liquids or a pod that's already pre-filled, it's a very dense, heavy, oily substance in there. Because you're starting with an oil-based substance and heating it up, and there's other chemicals in there, there's potential for that to develop into a sticky substance, which also impacts the user inhaling it. It can adhere to your lungs. The other thing that happens as these liquids and chemicals travel over the heating coil, the atomizer, over time, the metal finish can wear off that heating coil and get into the liquid that the person is then inhaling. So that's where you have, or hear about sometimes, particles getting into people's lungs. Similar to people who work in certain industries, construction, or people who are sanding things a lot. If they don't wear proper protective equipment, a lot of respiratory things involve people inhaling particles. The same thing can happen with these vape devices. The other thing that can happen is if you're in a confined space, like a car, and there's somebody in the car that has a respiratory issue like asthma, if there's a lot of vaping going on and they're exposed to it, it could trigger an asthma attack because again, it's such a concentrated vapor and aerosol in a confined space. The other thing is with these oily substances that you're starting with, there's potential to leave a residue on hard surfaces like car windshields. So you might actually notice some cars have cloudy windows if a person vapes a lot. Again, we know through a long-term studies for smoking about how secondhand smoke can be harmful to people with respiratory issues, can trigger ear infections in kids. There's a lot of studies for that. We're still finding out how vaping aerosol impacts people that are not the actual person vaping. There's been a lot of studies, health studies done over time. Unfortunately, with the way kids have been in and out of school the last year and a half or so, some of these studies were not done in this past year. So the last time the National Youth Tobacco Survey was done was in 2020. It showed a decrease in youth e-cigarette use, but the study was only done for January, February, and part of March of that year. They did not have as many schools participating, nor did they have as many youth participating, because that's when schools started to close down and go remote because of COVID. So that study was indicating a sharp decline in youth e-cigarette use, but we're really not sure because kids were remote. Not as many of the surveys were done or taken. So it's hard to tell. Unfortunately, we've kind of lost our consistency in doing some of these health surveys just because other things became more important over the last couple of years. The thing that was noticeable, I mean, if youth use rates did go down, that's great. But unfortunately, we've seen the number of e-cigarette users still stay high, and they have a strong dependence on nicotine because the products they're using are a much higher concentration of nicotine, even in the new disposable devices. You're talking 3, 5, 6, and 7% nicotine, which is high. When Juul first came on the market, they had products in the US that were 2 and 4%, and that was considered high. Well, now you're looking at products that are much higher that are out there. The last time that the Youth Risk Behavior Survey was done across the state, New Hampshire, was 2019. And at that time, our high school youth use rate, meaning they had used an e-cigarette at least one time in the last 30 days prior to the survey, we were up almost to 34%. You have to also look at it that 66% of the high school kids said no, they had never used e-cigarettes. So that's the good news. Again, these surveys haven't been able to take place. So it's kind of an unknown where we've headed. We don't know. There's the possibility that more kids may have used these types of products when they were at home more often. Kids have said they got very bored. They didn't have some of their normal social groups, drama club, Spanish club, whatever it may be, or sports things to do the last year and a half on a regular basis. So getting bored, sometimes they took up other things that may not have been as healthy. Some of the concerning effects of nicotine in any of these products are that it is a highly addictive chemical derived from tobacco plants. Now it's also being made synthetically. We know even less about that form of nicotine. It tends to be stronger. Psychoactive effects. No, this is not marijuana, but nicotine can have psychoactive effects on people of different ages because it acts as a stimulant. It relaxes people, but it also creates an adrenaline rush, or they call it a nick hit. It can create that stimulating energy type of reaction too. Drug reinforcement behavior. It affects the reward center of your brain. Your reward center releases dopamine, which makes us feel good. So people return to using nicotine products because they do have that reaction, the chemical reaction in their brain where they do have that good feeling. A lot of people have an urge to smoke when they first wake up, before bed. For kids, it's after class, between classes. If people are using these products and feel they need to use them more often, that may indicate that they are addicted to the nicotine. It's also tough for people sometimes to be around other people. They may relapse after they have quit using nicotine products. It's very easy to get reinitiated to nicotine and start up use of the product again. And then the physical dependence is kind of scary, especially for young people, because your brains are still developing into your early to mid 20s. And that's the part of the brain, our brains develop from back to front. The front part of your brain is where the reward center is located. So for kids, for young people under 25, that part of the brain hasn't fully developed yet. And that's where substances attack the brain and attack the reward center. Something else with nicotine products, especially if they're inhaled from cigarettes or vapes, in as little as 7 to 20 seconds, the nicotine hits the brain and creates that reaction. It's faster than other drugs. It's very quick, very hard, and very fast delivery system, whether it's vaped or inhaled from a cigarette. Again, we said how it hits the reward center of the brain. The reward center of the brain is a good thing normally, because it releases dopamine when something good happens, but you're creating kind of a false reaction by introducing substances. So for young people, these are some of the things that nicotine can affect very quickly. Self-control, mood swings, calmness, learning and attention may change. Sitting in a classroom, teachers have noticed that kids are less attentive, or they're fidgety because they want and feel they need to have that nicotine fix. What we try to share with young people is it's not like you can go out and replace your brain or your lungs. So things and decisions that happen now can affect you long term. This is what's really challenging with nicotine and other substances. It can actually change how your brain circuits work. Sometimes it can lead to permanent changes in your brain, and that's kind of the scary things. Again, what we try to really relay to young people is your brain and your lungs are still developing into your early 20s. Those are the last two parts of your system to fully develop. If you're around somebody that uses vape products, one thing to keep in mind is less than a half a teaspoon of a nicotine solution, if it's ingested by a toddler, can be fatal. That's how strong some of these solutions, vape liquids are. You say, how can that happen? Well, when we show you some of the packaging, you'll see how a young child or a toddler could mistakenly pick up something that's actually a vape solution and not candy or not a juice box that they thought it was. There's actually been also accidental poisonings of pets. Pets are attracted to the sweet smells and the residual oils that may come from faulty devices, or if someone's refilling a tank or a mod system and spills some of the e-liquid on the counter or on a table, the next person comes along and touches that and then touches their eyes or their nose or their mouth. There can be some severe skin irritation from the nicotine solutions. We've done years of studies, long-term studies, health studies that show how smoking can cause cancer almost every organ of your body. And sometimes people have smoked for many years, sometimes they have not. We're still learning about the effects and what can happen with vaping. And again, it's not long-term studies. Right now, if somebody that's 13, 14, or 15 is vaping and continues to vape, we don't know what their body's going to look like in 10 years. We don't have those studies in place yet. It's still considered a relatively new product. Unfortunately, we're probably going to find out the hard way as to how much damage long-term vaping can do. We have seen some short-term health impacts from vaping, and we do have record of those, and studies have been done. I'll show you a little bit more on those in a second. Just some of the effects from people who use nicotine. This is some of the things that happens. Not everybody is the same. Again, that initial hit of nicotine can create an alertness because it's a rush to your system because the delivery to the brain is so quickly. For some people, it does reduce their appetite. That's why you hear a lot of smokers when they're trying to quit. One suggestion is to drink a lot of water so you feel full, so you don't snack a lot. For some people, using nicotine increases blood pressure and heart rates. Again, not a good thing. Some people who try to quit experience the other side effects, the headaches, the anxiety, restlessness, sweating, dizziness. The problem with teen use is teens may have less severe withdrawal symptoms than adults do, but they're going to happen much earlier for a young person because their brain is still developing. So the process that's been done that makes a big difference with vaping versus cigarettes, for some people who try cigarettes for the first time, they inhale or take a drag off a cigarette and they have a cough, or they initially cough because it's a very strong hit to the back of the throat. It almost creates like a gag reflex and somebody may cough. With these newer products, like nicotine salt solutions, it's a smoother delivery of the aerosol or of the vapor to the person's back of the throat. So nicotine salt formulas are actually a liquid. Juul was one of the first companies to come out with this, but because of the flavors and because of the chemical composition, it does not create a strong hit to the back of the throat. So if for a first-time user or a young person or an adult who has never smoked, it's a smoother delivery. It doesn't make you cough or gag like cigarettes might. Again, makes it a more appealing product to a wider audience. So these are some of the packaging, just examples over time. These are some nicotine salt e-liquids. There was a company out there, I don't even know if they're around anymore, and it was called Nic Salt Blow Sauce. They actually used kind of packaging that was similar to the Box Top for Education promotion that was done in schools. And you'll see up above that the blow sauce coupon looks very close to the Box Top for Education coupon. The image on the right are just how they've tried to duplicate flavors that are popular. Again, if you were to focus on adults trying to quit smoking, you probably would not need liquids that were called Max Loops or berries or Max Fish or Max Melons. You could just sell the flavor to an adult. So again, it is apparent that through packaging and through marketing, they're trying to get a much younger audience of consumers. There have been some studies done. If you talk to young kids, they don't like the smell of cigarettes. A lot of them don't. They would never consider smoking. Unfortunately, vaping to them is the perception of harm is low. They don't realize that nicotine's in some of this stuff. An example is a Juul pod is the equivalent of 41 cigarettes, which is 2 packs of cigarettes. Here in the US, packs of cigarettes are sold with 20 cigarettes. So if somebody's up to a pod a day, they're getting almost the equivalent of 2 packs of nicotine that you would get from smoking cigarettes. Puff Bar, which is one of the just popular disposables that comes in a variety of nicotine strengths, that could be equivalent to 50 cigarettes. If you went through a Puff Bar in a week, that's like smoking 50 cigarettes. And then Sorin pods, those are pods that are bought for the Sorin device. Some of their pods hold enough e-liquid and at a high enough nicotine strength that it's the equivalent to 90 cigarettes. I think this is kind of the key thing when you're trying to discuss this with young people, just that they need to be aware, just because it's labeled that it's watermelon or strawberry banana, it's still harmful. It doesn't mean that you're actually inhaling just fruit, just because the name of it may be catchy and may sound like a fruit flavor. These are just some of the images of disposables that are out there and the high levels of nicotine in them. And again, these are very, they're not outpriced or priced out of the possibility for kids. I mean, if you have a young person who works a part-time job, if they go to Starbucks, they might spend as much as $6 on a special coffee. Some of these devices are less than $6 or buy one, get one for less than $6. So again, it's not out of the realm of possibility. The old-fashioned e-cigarette that I showed you that had to be plugged in to be charged, that used to go for $165. So that was something that a kid wasn't going to buy. Plus, it looked like a cigarette. They don't look like cigarettes anymore. Our concerns and the public health concerns is occasional use of any nicotine products can, especially with young people with developing brains, can lead to more frequent use or regular use. And then for some people of all ages, it becomes total dependency and they really have trouble giving up that nicotine product. I think we've all seen, or in some cases, I had somebody in my family who was on oxygen and smoked, continued smoking. They just could not break the cycle of nicotine addiction. And that's unfortunate, but it does happen. So some of the other issues, there's hundreds of brands of these devices out there. They are all regulated as tobacco products, but there's other regulations that have not worked out as well as they thought, or the regulations had some gray areas. For example, a couple of years ago, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, said, well, you can't have any flavored pods sold. Well, that was specifically trying to cut down on Juul's popularity with young people. You could still buy Juul pods, just you were not getting the mango, the creme brulee flavors. They had to do their American tobacco and other tobacco flavors, but that was Juul. Some of these other devices are pre-filled. Some of the liquids are in bottles. Those could still be sold. So you only eliminated a couple of companies from selling flavored products. You didn't really harm or modify the whole industry. Again, when we talked about kids picking up packages or picking up devices, the e-liquids on the right, or in the left square, but on the right side, those are vapes, the names of vape flavors. And then on the right, you see the food product. You see Sour Patch Kids, that's a common candy, but you have an e-liquid that mimics the packaging of some of the candy. Again, when we talk about flavors, a lot of the companies will say that they're using an approved FDA flavor. Well, the flavor may be approved, but it's approved for food products. It's approved for candy bars or for ice cream or things that we eat and ingest and digest over time. Nobody's approved these flavors to be heated up and mixed with other chemicals and then inhaled. Nobody's tested them. So again, we're exposing people to something that does not have a known outcome. This does not mean that all these chemicals are in every e-liquid or flavor pod. These are just some of the common chemicals that as adults and as kids, we probably would not touch. We definitely wouldn't heat them up and inhale them. So you have things like acetone, which is a nail polish remover, stuff like ethylbenzene, which is found in paints and pesticides. Some of these chemicals are actually in the e-liquids and the flavor pods that are in vape devices, along with nicotine. Another concern in general over the last couple of years is the use of marijuana products. In this case, marijuana wax or dabbing is taking that gold kind of waxy looking substance. People are taking apart vape devices at times and putting the wax right on the heating coil and then inhaling it directly, which is dangerous. Just making the wax or the dab is a dangerous process. The other concerning thing is that, like nicotine, over time, the levels of THC, which is a psychoactive component for marijuana, has increased dramatically. It used to be years ago that 10% THC was considered strong. Now you have products that can be as high as 40 to 80% levels of THC. So again, dangerous, especially when people think of states where marijuana is legalized. They don't realize potentially the harmful effects of it because they hear that it's been legalized in other states or other places. So possible side effects too are dangerous. Again, when you talk about in brains, this is important just because nicotine is bad. If you add this along with the nicotine, there can be permanent brain damage, loss of consciousness. Again, every individual person is different. How somebody vapes is very different too. You have different size devices, you have different levels of nicotine, you have somebody inhaling for a longer or shorter period of time. That's why it's very hard to say what the impact is going to be because the devices are so different and the user or consumer uses the device so differently. This is just an example of packaging that I found interesting. The entire back panel of this pre-filled THC pods is a warning label. So when we think of us as adults, how often or how thoroughly do we read warning labels or read labels on packaging? You wouldn't really expect a young kid to read the entire warning label on the back of these THC pods. but they put it there because they're legally required to. So the other concern, of course, on our end as a lung health organization is you're developing lungs. Overall, for all of us, our lungs are our filter. That's what protects us from environmental things 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's just important to know that your lungs are still developing into your early 20s. Unfortunately, exposure, just everyday exposure to what we may be around, could be the type of work you do. If you're a contractor, if you're an auto body shop person, you're already dealing with environmental issues, but to add something like vaping or smoking that can irritate your lungs or that can expose you to particles is very dangerous. On an average day, sitting at your desk or sitting at home without doing a real strenuous activity, we breathe in and out about 17,000 times. So our lungs are very important. There are, of course, concerns just in general. Pre-COVID, there were concerns with vaping and sharing of devices. For years, we've told kids, don't share your water bottles at sporting events, just because you can potentially pass along things like mono and strep throat and other viruses. Well, with vaping, the same thing applies. And then, of course, COVID adds another layer because that is a respiratory issue. So people need to be aware that sharing devices is just not a good idea in general, and it's not a good idea right now. Prior to the outbreak of COVID around the country and around the world, there were some studies being done because we had an increase in severe respiratory issues by people as young as 13 up to somebody as old as 82. These were respiratory issues where the person had to be hospitalized, in some cases put on a ventilator because their lungs were not working well. And over the time and the studies were being done, it became known as EVALI, which was acute e-cigarette and vaping lung injury cases. There were over 60 deaths during that time. The study stopped in February of 2020. That was the last count at the time because other things started happening. So some of the consistent things reported in all those cases were people using devices that were knockoffs or solutions that someone else had made. They weren't necessarily sold in a vape shop. People were mixing things on their own. One of the big common themes with all these cases was that vitamin E acetate was being added to the liquids along with THC. So what vitamin E acetate does is it expands or makes more of a product. It's like a filler. But when you heat that up with other chemicals and with flavors and vape it, it's not good for your system, and it was actually destroying people's lungs. The other thing, if you think about vitamin E, we take it orally as a vitamin or a tablet, or we apply it topically. No one has recommended that you heat it up and inhale it. So again, it gets back to the use of these oils that could be helpful in other ways, but when you mix them with chemicals and heat them up, it's just not good for anybody. This was an extreme example, but we share it just because it did happen, and this young gentleman has been interviewed on Good Morning America and some other shows. The image on the left is his lungs when he was hospitalized. You can barely see them. That thin, like blackish gray area, that's his lungs. They were not inflating. And then the image on the right is his lungs after a double lung transplant. That's how quickly his system failed. He was moved up on the transplant list because he was only 17, needed a double lung transplant. Again, an extreme case, but it was due to vaping, and he had only vaped for a few months. And this is the young kid. He was a high school track star. And then a few months later, he was hospitalized after having a double lung transplant. It's altered his life dramatically. And these types of surgeries, this lung transplant is not a permanent fix. Usually they last 8 to 10 years. So unfortunately, he may be going through this again in the future. So some of the popular products, these change constantly. This is by no means a complete list, just to give you an idea what they look like. I mean, when you think about that old product that looked like a cigarette, none of these look like cigarettes. They're kind of cool in a way. They're made to capture people's attention, but unfortunately they deliver some pretty bad stuff. So there's all different types and styles. Basically, the bottom line is they can kind of be easily concealed. You're getting away from the tanker mod systems that release a large cloud of aerosol. These are more discreet. Again, you don't get the smell of a cigarette with the use of this stuff. And these are like the disposables that are everywhere right now. And there's, you know, companies have 8 to 20 something flavors in their line of disposables, all different nicotine levels. And again, a lot of buy one, get one promotions. These are not in vape shops alone. These are sold in convenience stores like urban gas stations, Cumberland Farms, places like that. So they are somewhat easy to get. The other scary thing is it used to be 200 to 300 puffs of nicotine or hits of nicotine in these devices. The newer ones on the right, the Flume Float, have as many as 3,000 hits of nicotine in one device. So not only have they increased the percentage of nicotine in the solutions, they've increased how much one device can give the user. And again, if you ever see somebody in a car vaping, if you're at a stoplight or whatever, they tend to take quite a few hits while they're not moving. It's different than smoking. You can see how much of your cigarette burns. You can see when you put a cigarette out. You know that you have 20 in a pack. With some of these devices, the user potentially can lose track of how much they're taking a hit of nicotine because there's no pack to look at. There's no cigarette that you're putting in an ashtray. These are just some different accessories. They came up with wraps a few years ago where you could kind of personalize it like you would your phone. Other devices that are out there, again, notice the spelling of the Juul charger. They did a knockoff on Juul. Juul, the company, is Juul, and this company did a quick thing where they just changed the lettering so people would think it was the Juul company's product. It's not. Holders for the back of your phones. That was a common thing a couple of years ago. Watches that look like smart watches, but they have, as you can see, the mouthpiece on the top of the watch. There's a whole line of clothing that's out there that's been around for a couple of years. This company actually got in a little bit of trouble because they were known to be marketing to younger people under the age of 21. They came up with a system like a Camelback hydration system, but that draw cord that you see in the center, they sell that separately. You can either buy their hooded sweatshirt with the draw cord built in, or you can buy the draw cord and put it in your own hooded sweatshirt. Again, it's a way to conceal if you're vaping in an office or in a school where vaping's not allowed, smoking's not allowed, people can get away with it. And this was interesting. This company said they created these gloves as a convenient way to have your USB drive with you, which I don't know how many of us actually go skiing or hiking or outdoors in the snow with your USB drive. It's another tool for trying to take your vape with you, actually, but they promoted it as a way to carry your USB with you. So we talked about exposures, toddlers, young children who can't read the labels. This is why. The red squares indicate the normal food, or excuse me, the red squares indicate the e-liquid. The black squares indicate the food product that it looks similar to. The lower left is the one that was concerning because that was an apple flavored e-juice that looked very close and very similar to juicy juice boxes that a lot of kids would have in their lunch or have at home. So big picture, we feel as a public health organization that one of the big issues is the flavors. You know, again, the marketing and packaging and the flavors. If you're trying to get adults to quit smoking, you probably don't need 15,000 flavors and 400 to 500 types of devices. It could have been done differently. The ads could have been done differently. There were actually 2 years ago back to school ads. Obviously, if the tobacco age back then, which would have been 19 in New Hampshire, the back to school ads are for the kids. They're not for parents or grandparents going back to school. Yes, there may be some parents and grandparents going back to school, but the large scale, large volume, it's for students. Social looks like it's a normal social thing to do, just like tobacco companies did with cigarettes years ago. They focus on the flavors and the colorful items and colorful devices. This is interesting because the 1990s cool cigarette ad is on the left. And then in 2016, Juul did an ad that was very similar using models, and just the style of the whole ad campaign was very similar. To try to counteract a lot of this marketing, the Centers for Disease Control has released some warning messages. Again, their point that they're trying to get across to people of all ages is that most of these vape devices and e-cigarettes do contain nicotine, which can cause addiction or harm brain development. So that's been tried to be the counter messaging or the awareness messaging. So all things combined, the lack of regulation, lack of enforcement, the way that these companies can advertise, again, you can see still vape devices and vape companies advertising on TV. You don't see cigarette ads or tobacco ads on TV for cigars and other tobacco products, but you can still see vape devices. You don't see a lot of cigarette smoking in TV shows or movies shown on TV, but you do see vapes being used at times. Sorry, getting back to that one, again, the perception of harm is very low with these products, especially when you talk about the fruit flavors. And a lot of kids are under the impression it's a healthy thing to do when they're using something that, you know, is a banana flavor or an apple flavor. They don't understand that the chemical in there heated up and inhaled is not the same as eating an apple. They don't put two and two together necessarily. And again, it's the advertising, social media, influencers. There's a lot of younger famous people that are promoting these products to kids. So we do have some policies here in New Hampshire. The age did change. We became a tobacco 21 state as of July of 2020. So all of these products are governed under that. So nobody under the age of 21 should be purchasing or possessing these products. School grounds, public school grounds have had policies in place for a while. And it also right now is illegal to bring even an empty pod or vape device on school grounds when you're under the age of 21, and to bring it on school grounds in general. I think, sorry, I've got a frozen screen on my end, not you guys. I can't tell.
Now it just went back. Now it says public health concerns.
Okay, sorry, folks. I'll try to finish this up before it explodes. Just some of the health concerns to keep in mind. We don't know the long-term health impacts for people of any age right now. Unfortunately, we're going to be playing catch up in 15 or 20 years if vape continues to be this popular. The industry is not fully regulated. It's way ahead of the regulations. Smoking is still the leading cause of preventable death in the US. Through studies of smoking and cigarettes in particular, 88% of adults smokers started before the age of 18. So again, you're initiating the use of nicotine when your brain is still developing. That's why a lot of adults, when they started smoking and trying cigarettes younger, continued to smoke. And then unfortunately with vaping, you are more likely, if you start vaping at a young age, to move on to another product that contains nicotine. You may stop vaping, you may pick up cigarettes, or you may pick up what we call other tobacco products, which are things like dissolvables that you put in your mouth. So there's a lot of products out there once you initiate the use of these nicotine products. For parents and for educators and people, these are just some possible things that may arise where a young person may be vaping. It does not mean they are vaping. But if somebody vapes a lot, they could be noticing an increase in their thirst, the desire for flavor. because they're so used to having flavors. Nosebleeds, you're drying out your respiratory system in general and your nose as well. Just they may cut back on caffeine because for some people, nicotine has kind of that reaction in their system that caffeine does. You get that quick jolt of energy or whatever. And again, that's because of the reaction in the reward center of your brain. May be more susceptible. We talked about respiratory irritation, lung irritation. You are more susceptible to respiratory illnesses like pneumonia. And if you start to see some unique looking devices, they may not be just USB drives or fun looking things like highlighters. The cascade of change is just awareness created through public health and policy measures. With cigarettes, we have changed over many years. We've changed how cigarettes are viewed and the norms for cigarettes. We're still at the beginning of trying to change awareness and knowledge as far as vaping is concerned. So we have a long way to go with that. And then what can we do? We can talk to kids, about vaping, give them resources. There's also information out there for parents and educators. There are a lot of free resources. A lot of them are computer-based, but we can also direct people to sites where they can download materials or have somebody else get them to them. Just something to keep in mind, we do have some free, no-cost resources here in New Hampshire that are specifically for adolescents. The My Life, My Quit program is not ours. It is promoted by the Department of Health and Human Services Tobacco Prevention and Cessation program here in New Hampshire. It is for New Hampshire youth that are aged 13 to 17. It's free, it's confidential. They can talk to somebody who is trained as far as trying to help people quit cigarettes, quit vaping, quit smoking. So again, that's a good resource for young people. The website is very good too for people who work for youth. For parents, there's resource tabs. For educators, there's resource tabs. So it's just a good assortment of information on that site. At the federal level, there are a lot of programs. One of them is smokefree.gov, and there are sections, as you can see by those tabs, under smokefree.gov. They have programs for veterans, for women, for teens. They have a Spanish-speaking program, so there's a lot of information on that site, and that's at no cost as well. If you're over 18 here in New Hampshire, the Quit Now New Hampshire program is something to look into. Again, free resources and coaching. If you qualify for the program and agree to the guidelines that they have, you are eligible for free nicotine replacement therapy. And that's called NRT. And that's a way to gradually reduce the amount of nicotine somebody uses to hopefully get them off whatever tobacco product they may be using, whether it's cigarettes or vaping. And then Truth Initiative is a national organization, and they have something called This Is Quitting. And they also have the program that falls under is Text Ditch Vape, and that's the number you use. So again, a well-vetted program. And then I can send some of these things to Andrea by PDF through email if you have a way to post them. This is just a resource page that we've produced, and we updated it just this month. And it lists information for youth and teens, for parents, and for providers. And then our website also has links to these resources and to some of the information that I just gave you. Appreciate your time. Sorry I rushed. Sorry for the little glitch there. My view of the screen is a little bit different right now. I think I'm on the questions page. Be happy to explain something further, or if Andrea, if you and your colleague want to add anything, what you may be seeing in your region.
Sure, thanks, Kim. And yeah, you are on the questions slide, but actually, if you don't mind on stopping sharing, that way we can see folks that
Sure.
have their camera on. then we can just see each other. But so I see there are a couple of questions in the chat, which we will get to. And actually my first, the first thing that I want to talk about will address Darren's question. So she had asked if the YRBS, which for those on the call, if you're not familiar, the YRBS is the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So that is a national survey that goes out. Each state can kind of pick and choose some of the questions that they have on there. So not every state has the same questions, but they're generally pretty much the same. They ask questions to gather information from middle school and high school age youth every 2 years on things like physical activity, violence, whether it's, related to bullying or maybe sexual or dating violence. They ask about substance use, perception of harm. They ask, just a whole host of different questions. So the YRBS was disseminated through schools in 2019. Unfortunately, it takes a good year before we can get some of that data. So a lot of the schools in New Hampshire and Vermont just started taking the 2021 YRBS. So we won't get those results until sometime in 2022. But I did want to share just some statistics from the 2019. So again, remember, at this point, that's pretty old data. That's pre-COVID data. We do know, I know Kim, you had mentioned, I think it looks like we maybe are trending in a positive direction a little bit with vaping. I have my theories of why that may be, but now that kids are back in school, I fear that we're going to see that go back up. But so I just wanted to share some stats. So I'll talk about the Upper Valley. And when I say the Upper Valley, this is going to include YRBS results from a couple of Vermont schools that take the Vermont YRBS, and then a couple of New Hampshire schools that take the New Hampshire YRBS, because our Upper Valley, covers both sides of the river. So in 2019, we had 24% of our Upper Valley youth. So again, that's the average of our 5 school districts in the Upper Valley, reported that they used vapor, like e-cigarettes or vapor products, at least one time in the past 30 days. So I think, Kim, you said the New Hampshire statistic was something like 33.8%. I don't know if that's ever been used or if that was 30-day use. I can't remember which that was.
30-day.
30-day, yeah. So 30-day for just the Upper Valley region is at 24%, and down in the Greater Sullivan County region, they're up at 37%. So, one side's doing a little bit better than the state average, and then in Greater Sullivan, we're seeing it's a little bit higher. I looked at the results. The New Hampshire side asks students where they were getting access to the vapor products or e-cigarettes. For the Upper Valley, again, just the New Hampshire side, because like I said, not both states have to ask the same questions. So it's not, Vermont and New Hampshire, they have some of the questions are worded differently, or some states have some questions and the other state doesn't have it. So New Hampshire asks, again, where they were getting these vapor products. 14% said that they were borrowing them from, we can make an assumption, it doesn't ask that question, but just that they were borrowing them. And in Greater Sullivan County, 16% of youth were reporting that they borrowed. That's how they were accessing those vaping products. And then on the Vermont side, so Darren asked a question if they ask about perception of harm for vapor products. The Vermont side does not, the New Hampshire side does not ask it, but Vermont does. So for our Upper Valley Vermont schools, we have 61% of Vermont youth were reporting that they perceive it as being wrong or very wrong for somebody their age to use a vapor product. So that's, that's pretty good. I did not look at trend data, so I'm not sure if
that's better than what I thought it would be, honestly.
Yeah, and again, that's only, 3 schools, in our region on the Vermont side. So it's doesn't encompass all of the Upper Valley, and it, doesn't even touch on Greater Sullivan. But I'll be really interested to see what 2021, what those YRBS results look like, because they took it within about a month or 2 of being back in school. So it'll be interesting for those youth that, were home, remote learning through the pandemic, not really around their friends due to physical distancing or social distancing, taking the YRBS, a month or 2 back into being in school. It'll just be interesting to see. So then I see another question, Zadiah, I hope I pronounced that correctly. If not, go ahead and correct me. But we have on here, do we know, Kim, how vaping interacts with type 1 diabetes? Do you have any information about that?
I don't specifically. I have to do a little research. I think too, the whole medication piece is different for everybody, because they haven't really, again, done a lot of studies with the interaction medication, but also the factors of somebody who is suffering or has diabetes. Yeah, I'd have to look further. I don't honestly know if there has, sometimes the journals of American Medicine or American Academy of Pediatrics will have something like that. But again, we're looking at relatively, even though the product's been around for a while, it's relatively new overall as far as studies being done for specific health things. So sorry, I don't have more information on that.
All right. Anybody else have any other questions for Kim or anything that we can clarify?
I just want to add too, and again, thank you all for your time. I guess the thing for us that we struggle with, kids are going through an awful lot. So are adults right now, and they have been for a couple of years. When you throw all that mix in and just, you know, peer pressure comes into play. There's a lot of things that come into play. I will share that this school year, we've heard more just from a few schools that have contacted us that the kids at the middle school level, they're having more issues with middle schoolers vaping or getting caught at school vaping or having devices on them than high school kids. And again, that can happen. That's trends or whatever you want to call it, good or bad, with substances, with alcohol, with whatever it may be. Unfortunately, I think too, the prevalence of devices and perception of harm being so low, younger kids are trying this stuff. And it's one of those things where it looks like fun, unfortunately. That's the way it's been marketed, and that's the perception. And it's hard to change that because that's been out there for a while now. So I know that everybody has a lot of things to deal with, but we just want people to really understand that nicotine use at such an young age can be really detrimental to kids. And these products are really packed with a punch of nicotine right now. So thank you guys for listening. I will try to see if I can get an answer about the diabetes thing, and I can pass it along to Andrea.
Thanks,
Thank
Kim.
you for sharing, Kim. I know all the kiddos that I know that do use vapes, they don't think that it's dangerous at all, and they don't understand what's happening. They're just kind of doing it because everybody else is. So this will definitely be interesting in the role that I have to see if I can try to help increase that perception of harm.
Yeah, I think at least right now in New Hampshire, they've had the Quit Now New Hampshire program for, adults trying to quit smoking, and vaping was added. But I'm glad that we have been able to maintain the My Life, My Quit program. Again, it depends on funding for the tobacco cessation program every year, but they're able to do that again. But if you just look at that website, it's pretty user friendly, but what I like is the resource tabs that are for people who work with youth, for educators, for healthcare providers, for guardians and parents. So they've got a kind of a good just cross section of information for all of us. And the program, what's neat, I'm probably doing this improperly, but there's business cards that schools can hand out versus a rack card or a sheet of paper. I think the premise behind this format was that this is something a kid can quickly take from a school nurse or guidance counselor person, and they don't have to be obvious about it. So that's kind of how they promoted that. But there's a lot of free posters and materials that schools and people can download on that website. And I'll send you specific links too. thank you all for your time, and I appreciate all together inviting us to participate.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kim. I just want to share, I put in the chat, there are these Operation Parent handbooks that we have, we've got a good amount of, we just got a large order in, that I'm happy to send to anybody if you're interested. And I just double checked, and we have some for elementary age, parents and caregivers that have kids in the elementary school, and then middle and high school. So I just threw the link in for the middle and high school. It does cover vaping in the middle high school, and then e-cigarettes in the elementary edition. So please feel free to put in the chat if you're interested in that. I have contact information so I can reach out to you, and I'm happy to send that to you free of charge. You'll see, the pricing, but we have access to it, and it would be free of charge for you. But I just want to let you know that that is an option. And these handbooks also include much more than just, e-cigarettes and vaping. It has a whole host of topics to help parents and caregivers sort of navigate the teen years and, the elementary years. So feel free to put in the chat if you would like one. Otherwise, if nobody has any other questions, I think we can go ahead and end this, this presentation. Anne Marie, I see that, so I will certainly get that out to you in the mail. Otherwise, thank you so much to everybody for your time. Like I said, this will be posted. We recorded this, so it'll be posted on Altogether has a YouTube channel. So feel free to send it to people in your network that maybe were not able to join us live for this. We would love to get the information out to as many people as possible. Oh, Lindsay. Oh, I see all three of you want it. So I will get those in the mail. I think probably it will be Tuesday when I get back into the office to get them in the mail. But I will send everybody an email to get your mailing addresses, and I'll get those in.
Yeah, the parent handbooks are really, really helpful. The elementary ones are a little bit smaller, but the middle and high school ones, there's like 60 pages with different topics on everything under the sun. So it's a really great resource to use, which is awesome.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. And thank you again, Kim, for taking time to meet with us this evening and share this, I almost said wonderful information. It's very informative. It's not wonderful, but very informative information. And hopefully we can all start to make some progress, and like Darren said, increase that perception of harm with youth and make some changes. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a good night.